Shabbat Shalom. Last week we read Parshat Yitro and the description of the event, the great event, the theophany at Har Sinai, and the giving of the Torah, especially the Ten Commandments, which appear Parshat Yitro. This week's parsha, Mishpatim, as the title indicates, is a collection of laws. But what connection do these laws have to the Ten Commandments, and what's the sort of the logic behind the way the Torah presents these things? That's something that worried or that challenged the Ramban, which I'll be talking about in this video. Now, it's based basically on an ancient Jewish tradition, belief that all of the Torah is somehow compressed into the Ten Commandments, or to put it the other way, the more it actually plays out, one can expand the Ten Commandments by filling in by associating with them each commandment a number of mitzvot. One can expand the Ten Commandments to the 613 commandments. It's an ancient tradition mentioned by Rashi towards the end of our parsha. It served as the basis for many piyutim that were written to be said on Shavuot when we celebrate Matan Torah, and some very famous ones were written by great Jewish poets and scholars. Saadia Gaon wrote a very important one. The most famous and the one that had the greatest impact and greatest reach was by the great poet Shlomo Ibn Gibirol. His Azarot were well known, and there were many commentaries written on them. But this became a sort of a literary genre, and the Rambam, interestingly enough, in the introduction to his Sefer Mitzvot, when he tells us about what were the motivations he had for writing Sefer Mitzvot, tells us that one of the main motivations was the way he was so upset with these Azharot. The Rambam is usually a very stoic person, doesn't reveal his emotions very much. But when we hear him talk about how distressed he was hearing these Azharot being recited in the synagogue on Shavuot, and knowing that their count of the 613 mitzvot is based on the Bahag, the Baal Halachot Gedolot, and is inaccurate in the Rambam's opinion, I can imagine the Rambam just sitting there, squirming in his seat and clenching his fist and saying, "This is intolerable," and eventually deciding to write his own Sefer Mitzvot. The Ramban, of course, wrote a critique and sort of an alternative to the Rambam's Sefer Mitzvot, but he doesn't connect them to the 613 mitzvot that are enumerated in the Sefer Mitzvot, to the Ten Commandments. But he does in our parsha. Now, for the Ramban's take on how the Ten Commandments are expanded in what follows, first we have to recall, as the Ramban, the Midrash, almost everyone notices that the Ten Commandments are divided into the first two, which are matters of of belief, the existence of God, and that there should be no other gods, and then the other 8, which are mitzvot, commandments about behavior, religious precepts like Shabbat, and ethical behavior like Kabbalat Avicha, and so on. And the Ramban says that the first 2 commandments are already reiterated at the end of Parshat Yitro, where it says after the description of Har Sinai, Atem ri'item ki min hashamayim dibarti machem. You've seen that I've spoken to you from the heavens, which is restates the first commandment that God exists, and lo ta'asu niti Elohei chesed v'zahav lo ta'asu lachem, not to make gods of gold and silver, which restates the second commandment. Then Parshat Mishpatim carries on with the others, and here the Ramban makes a sweeping statement, a very interesting statement, I think very true statement, that all of the Mishpatim evolve out of the last of the Ten Commandments, Lo Tachmod, because if we weren't coveting things that don't belong to us. If I, didn't want anything that didn't belong to me, then, I wouldn't steal, I wouldn't do any of the other things that are forbidden. So it's really the core mitzvah is lo tachmod, not to want these things. If you don't want them, you won't do anything, illegal or illicit to try and get them. Of course, it doesn't apply to everything, the mitzvot of kibbud av v'eim and so on, but it's a very powerful thought. And the Ramban tries to show how, at least in grosso modo, just say in a general matter, this explains the arrangement in Parshat Mishpatim, because Parshat Mishpatim looks like a sort of a hodgepodge of rules and regulations in all sorts of areas of life, without any order to it. And I think that Ibn Ezra actually says something to this effect, which gets the Ramban annoyed, because the Ramban thinks that the Torah is written in a very strict and coherent order and logical order, and so he tries to show how the Mishpatim in our parsha basically move from the chamor to the pachot chamor, that is, from those that are very serious violations of our ethical code, to those that are less severe. But this leads us to a question which, in any event, other people would ask, and that is, why is the very first mishpat, the very first set of rules, Parshat Mishpatim, the rules governing Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, the period of time that the slave has to work, and then freeing him or having him go on until the Yovel. So it's interesting to see how the Ramban answers that. So why does Parshat Mishpatim begin with the rules of Eved Ivri? Well, it's because Eved Ivri, the rules and the halachot dealing with Eved Ivri, connect, according to the Ramban, to some of the most fundamental areas of belief, some of the most basic connections within the cosmos, between the parts of the cosmos and between humanity and God. It's nothing to do with social policy and the treatment of slaves or of employees or whatever. No, the whole secret here, the whole underlying, the whole principle that grounds this thing and makes it in such an important element of belief, so that it should begin Parshat Mishpatim almost the way Anochi begins the Ten Commandments. It's all in the numbers, the number 7 and the number 50. Because the slave works in the six years, and in the 7th year is set free, this recalls to us Yetziat Mitzrayim. This recalls to us Shabbos, which the 7th day of the week, the Sabbath, which in turn recalls to us the two, fundamental. I once said the two supports of Jewish belief: the creation of the world, when God rested on the 7th day, rested, so to speak, and Yetziat Mitzrayim, when the Jews were freed from slavery, and a slave, of course, never has a day of rest. The 7th, the number 7, is, according to the Ramban, it's sort of built into the cosmos, and it's sanctified. And so also for the number 50, if the slave decides to not to be released after the 7th year, but to continue to working for his master, and he works ad olam, which significantly for the Ramban, the ad olam means for the Yovelim. For the Ramban, it's actually it's not a drosh. It's literally olamot for him are these cosmic cycles, these eons, whatever you want to call it, and the number 50 there is also significant. So because these numbers, the 7 and the 50, are so fundamental, not just to Jewish belief, but to the way the cosmos is constructed, and the way the time works itself out through the cosmos. In other words, we have the 7 here is a process. It takes 7 years and then 50 years. This makes the laws of the Hebrew slave into something that is not a matter of belief, but which is deeply, intimately connected to some of the basic fundaments of the Jewish outlook on life and the Jewish outlook on the world, according to the Ramban. Now, would I call this mystical or Kabbalistic? Not necessarily. It's true that the number 7 plays a role in the Sfirot of Kabbalah, but the Ramban doesn't mention them here. And same with these cosmic cycles. They're not the exclusive property of the Kabbalah. These are some beliefs which, if you want to label them as mystical or not, that's up to you. But for the Ramban, they all work together. The halacha, the number theory, the sodot that he finds that do connect to what later developed with the Kabbalah. They're all one. I wouldn't try to separate them. Occasionally, the Ramban does separate when he says al derech hasod or whatever. But this is, I think, for him, they're all part of this unified outlook. And within that, the Torah is written in order. The Torah is not something that's been sort of thrown together chapter by chapter, but it has a strict, coherent order from beginning to end, and anything that falls out of the chronological order is a special reason for it to do so. There is an order to the Mishpatim coming after the 10 Commandments, and an order to the Mishpatim in this parsha Mishpatim, and they connect to, again, fundamental areas of belief, fundamental areas of outlook, such as the sanctity, one could say, the sanctity of the number 7, and when it comes into play in the rules of Eved Ivri, that's enough to vault this mitzvah from just another social regulation, economic regulation, to something that is put at the head of the parsha, because it recalls for us these fundamental ideas. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom. And if you have a second, hit the like button.